two new guests now. Joining me is radio show host Hugh Hewitt, who also held many positions in the Reagan White House, including Assistant White House Counsel, and is an MSNBC contributor, and also Matthew Rojansky, Russia expert at the Woodrow Wilson International Center for Scholars. Gentlemen, thanks for being with me. Appreciate it.
You're welcome, Kate.
Hugh, let me start with you. The day has sort of played out in a different way as far as the news of the day. We're obviously very focused on what's happening in Florida. Donald Trump hasn't said anything since his intelligence briefing, but he put out that statement, not really taking a side, not really saying whether he accepted or didn't accept the results of, or the conclusions, rather, of the intelligence community. How do you read everything that's played out this week?
Well, it's not much of a surprise to me. I believe WikiLeaks to be a Russian front for a long period of time. I believe that Vladimir Putin has hated Hillary Clinton for a long period of time. What I find to be disturbing is that what the intelligence community reported on in the unclassified portion is that the Russians intended most of all to undermine confidence in the result of the election. And today on the House floor, you had Massachusetts Congressman Jim McGovern standing up and telling Vice President Biden he shouldn't accept the electoral votes cast from Alabama for Donald Trump because of the Russian meddling in our election. So Putin has won because Democrats are swallowing the giant whale of a lie that this election depended on what the Russians did. As Speaker Ryan said yesterday, the Russians didn't put the server in Secretary Clinton's basement. The Russians didn't keep her from campaigning in Michigan or Wisconsin. The Russians didn't do the change number that powered Donald Trump forward. So I'm glad that Donald Trump is laying off the intelligence community. I am disappointed in some members of the Democratic Party and in some members of the media who are playing into Putin's hand by suggesting that Putin won the election for Donald Trump.
But Matthew Rojansky, let me ask you, because the report does, we don't know the evidence, but it does draw the conclusion that Vladimir Putin and his colleagues did this intentionally and wanted to interfere with the election.
Right. So where the report focuses is really on the interests of the Kremlin, Vladimir Putin specifically, and the statements that they have made that basically embraced the positions expressed by Donald Trump that U.S. relations with Russia could be improved, and rejected the positions expressed by Clinton that she was going to get tougher with Russia, or that Putin was the enemy of the United States. The thing is, that's not a surprise. Any country that's been labeled as an enemy by an American political leading voice is probably going to reject that position. We've seen that before. I think what's really problematic is actually what Hugh puts his finger on right now, is that here we are barely 10 days out from a new administration coming into office, having to do confirmation hearings for new appointees, and we're rehashing or relitigating the election, even in part. Even if there is a 1% shred of doubt that the Russians have been able to raise about the integrity of the electoral process, that is a threat to American national security. So I think what's needed now more than anything, and I think it's very positive that the intelligence community has actually sat down with both the president and the president-elect. They're on the same page. They now have the same information. They have the classified information, which we in the general public don't yet have. And they're starting from the point that the new administration now has to govern. They now have to respond to this threat. Much more importantly, they have to deter future threats, whether it's from Russia, from China, North Korea, Iran, or anyone else, and they're all paying attention.
Well, let me ask you about the new administration, specifically Rex Tillerson, who's up for Secretary of State, because he tried to convince senators that his views on Russia are more nuanced than perhaps have been reported. Top Senate Foreign Relations Committee Democrat Ben Cardin told the Washington Post after meeting with Tillerson that the businessman was, quote, pretty forthcoming on sanctions and, quote, understands the importance of sanctions and recognizes that you need to have the ability to get results. So, Hugh, let me start with you. What kind of administration are we going to see if Tillerson indeed takes that post?
I hope an unpredictable one. Matt's colleague over at the Wilson Center, Rob Whitlock, and I have been talking about this for decades, actually. We don't want the Soviets and now the Russians to know what we are going to do. When Nixon ran for office in 1968, no one expected him to open up to China. All I know is that in this report that released today, the Russians never indicated that they thought Donald Trump could win. I think they were as surprised as Democrats, Republicans, and the media were that he did win. And I don't expect Donald Trump to tell us how he is going to negotiate with Russia, or Tillerson to tell us what is he aiming to do. But as Nixon changed the world by going in the direction of China in 1972, Trump may have it in his mind to tilt back to Russia and away from China, because China is a geopolitical threat greater greater to our interests, especially in the Pacific, than Russia. I don't know if Matt believes that's possible, but I think we ought to keep our conclusions limited until we see what is actually done by Team Trump once they have their hands on the levers of power.
Matt, what do you think? And is this all about deal-making for Donald Trump and Rex Tillerson?
Look, I mean, diplomacy is about deal-making. You know, what distinguishes the diplomacy side of the House from the use of military power side of the House is it's about talking and communicating, seeing if there's common ground, when there's disagreement, defining the areas where we can't make any progress and the areas where maybe we can get closer to each other. So, you know, if the Secretary of State designee is a good deal-maker, that's not inherently a bad thing. What I think Capitol Hill is going to be looking for, and specifically the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, is to hear a dose of reality from Tillerson as the nominee, because there's been so much inflated rhetoric. There's been so much demonization. They're going to need to hear from this guy. He understands Russia as it is.
Matt, thank you so much. We're out of time. Matt Rojansky, Hugh Hewitt, great to see you. Have a